Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Forever Alive by RebelzHeart. The Whitebeard pirates took in 3 children, but they didn't expect to be dealt with the burdens of the children. Is my life worth anything? Why do people keep lying to me? Why can't my brothers trust me? And, slowly, ASL becomes part of Whitebeard's family. But will they accept it? Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Smiling with pleasure that should have long escaped him as the familiar warmth of a summer island traveled across his skin, Vista turned to Kingdu, unable to contain the grin that was stretching across his lips. I smell adventure, right? Kingdu chuckled. You're easily pleased and excited. It's funny, like you're a little kid. If Vista was Thatch, he would have stuck out his tongue and made a face, but since he wasn't the hyperactive chef, thankfully, since he wouldn't know what to do if he had been born as such an idiot, he merely smirked. Look at the pot calling the kettle black. Kingdu turned beet red as Vista laughed, having noticed Kingdu's equally wide, if not wider, grin and impatient foot tapping. The only real children here are those 3. Anyways. Kingdu muttered in a futile attempt to change the subject as he coughed slightly. Vista turned to look at the 3 and gave a nod, smiling slightly fondly. Yes, I suppose they are. He agreed with a thoughtful bark of laughter. Are we getting off the ship now? I imagine that if we're not getting off the ship we'd have to deal with some very unruly brothers and sisters. Marco stepped up beside them and flashed them a quick, bright smile. Go ahead and do whatever you'd like. Pops gives us full permission. With a loud whoop of joy, Vista hurtled himself off the ship, grinning as Thatch leapt from the crow's nest with a loud scream of freedom as he splashed into the water. You okay? He snickered when the drenched redhead swam to shore, shaking of drops of water clinging to his skin and twisting his shirt, sighing when he realized it wasn't about to dry anytime soon. Thatch scowled at his shirt and mumbled, maybe the sun will dry it out, before looking up at Vista and grinning cockily. Of course I am, after all, you're talking to the amazing Thatch-sama, the bravest and stupidest of them all. Haruta cut him off, finishing his sentence with a laugh of mischievous joy before darting off, a merry grin lighting her practically glowing features as she skipped off into town as she dodged Thatch's irritated swipe. I'll get you back, Thatch called to her retreating form before giving a sigh of resignation as he turned to Vista and Kingdu. I won't be able to get her back, will I? They both gave him a do you seriously still need to ask look, and he sighed once more before conceding defeat. Well, then. He struck a dramatic pose. Let's go on a grand adventure. Okay, seriously, what? The corners of Kingdu's lips twitched upwards slightly, but the slight motion was enough for him and his traitorous lips gave into a full-blown smile. What did you think that we were about to do, idiot? He asked teasingly. I don't know, Thatch replied with a deceptively straight face. Whatever boring old guys do, I guess. They both glared at him before Vista pulled out his sword and started swinging it maniacally, screaming in a teasingly murderous fashion, Die, Thatch! I'll have you know I'm only 19. Thatch gave a small cry of false shock. You're that young? He exclaimed in surprise. I thought you were, like, 50. So then what gives with all those wrinkles? Vista started chasing him again. You'll regret ever having had a mouth when I'm done with you, he cried furiously. But after a while he began laughing almost hysterically at the preposterousness of the situation. Kingdu simply watched in confused amazement. Seriously, something is wrong with their heads. And I mean that in the politest way possible. But then again, he was probably considered crazy too. With a sigh, he barreled towards them and started to yell as well, the 3 laughing as they circled each other, no longer knowing who was chasing who or even their purpose in their exhausting game of tag. It was a shame that this light-hearted feeling wouldn't last. 000000000, Whitebeard's crew, strongest in the world. At our island, why? As he sauntered into the bar, Takashi perked up when the words reached his ears. He approached the bartender with the lazy arrogance of an all-too-cocky outlaw, and smiled sweetly. A Bloody Mary to go, Please, he requested pleasantly. The bartender said nothing for a few seconds, but merely gave his outfit a suspicious look, before requesting, "May I have the pleasure of knowing your face before you leave, sir?" Takashi tilted his head to the side, as though confused, before a wide smile crawled up his lips. "I'd show you, but then you'd have to die, mister. And I like you so far." The bartender chuckled merrily, as though he had just told him a funny joke. "I'll take my chances," he chortled in amusement. Takashi removed his hood, and all the color drained from the bartender's face. "You," the man hissed, backing up before slamming violently into his shelf. "What's a dirty marine like you doing here? Will you burn down our home again merely for existing to those who can't afford your taxes? Are you here to destroy our livelihood again? Kill innocent children? What would a monster like you be doing here?" Takashi frowned, and wagged a finger at the bartender. Now, no need to be so aggressive." He sing-songed sweetly. "If you'll give me my drink on the house, I'll consider it payment for your life." With a cold glare that may have chilled lesser men to the bone, the bartender handed him a glass. "Take it." The old man spat, fury lining the edge of his words. "And get out. Do not return here again. I don't need something that brings nothing but bad luck staining our home." "Oh my, such harsh words." Takashi murmured softly, not even bothering to pretend to be wounded. He gave the man a last, chillingly sweet smile, before reminding him with a false, icy voice full of sugar, "The Marines are only here to help." As the man fell to the ground in fear, his legs finally giving out beneath him, Takashi took a sip of his drink and pushed the hood back onto his head. A predator's smile lit his lips. "So, the Whitebeard pirates, sounds fun. 000000000. I'm Boo Red." Thatch whined to Kingdu as they sat down in a bar, sticking his tongue out childishly at the waitress when she asked for his ID. "I'm a pirate. I don't have an ID," Thatch exclaimed to the woman, insulted at her query. The waitress stiffened ever so slightly before bowing her head and whispering, "Please, get out of this town. We don't want any trouble, sire. The Marines have us under their protection. G7's base is located here, and Vice Admiral Takashi himself leads them." "Concerned for us?" Vista asked with an ironic smile. "How sweet of you." The waitress looked both equally terrified and revolted at the thought of being concerned for strangers. "Concerned for you?" she asked, giving a slight laugh filled with sorrow. "I'm concerned for myself. If I'm suspected of dealing with outlaws," she gave a little shake of her head, before drawing a finger across her neck. "Oh," Kingdu said softly in a voice of understanding. "I see. I'm sorry we're intruding." The waitress said nothing, but gave them a nervous smile and nodded, before scurrying off from sight. Thatch frowned. "I guess we'll just stock up and leave, then." He sighed. "Want to see what the brats are up to." The other two smiled and stood up. "Sure," Vista agreed, his voice firm. "Let's go." As they walked, well, Thatch skipped, but he was Thatch for goodness sake. You couldn't exactly expect him to do anything different. Out of the bar, Kingdu began to stiffen. Noticing, Vista's eyes narrowed, and his fingers clamped tightly around Thatch's arms before yanking him into a nearby alley, Kingdu swift to follow. "What's going on? Kingdu has the best observation hockey out of all of us," Vista explained in short, rapid bursts of breath. "And if he even twitches slightly, you've got to be on guard." Thatch's eyes widened in understanding, before he gave a firm nod and turned to Kingdu. "What do you feel?" he whispered, immediately feeling a little foolish for whispering. "I don't know, if I'm going to be honest," Kingdu but a low murmur. "But I don't like it. I know that for sure. It's a cold, icy feeling like somebody's about to be murdered for the owner of that hockey's amusement." He shivered slightly. "We need to get out of here." Vista nodded. "I'll alert Pops and we'll dash," he agreed. "I don't like this." Thatch scowled, crossing his arms. "This isn't right. I want to stay and fight." "What's wrong with fighting? We're strong. If it's only one guy we'll be fine. There's nothing to worry about." "We can't," Vista replied empathetically, his voice tight. "What about the safety of the town? What if by some ridiculous notion, the Marines here think that the town was supporting us or something? How much trouble do you think that everyone would be in, then?" Thatch fell silent, before repeating in a soft, regretful tone. "I just don't like it. I feel like a coward." "This isn't what a coward does," Kingdu reassured him. A coward would fight, perhaps, uncaring of anyone but himself. A coward would run away from the constant nagging of what-ifs. It's bravery to protect. It's cowardly to fight for the sake of fighting. Thatch's body tensed, then sagged, and he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. He agreed regretfully. But can we go quick? I don't want to have to think about this any more than I already have. Vista smiled and gave Thatch an encouraging squeeze on the shoulder, before waving a hand as he stepped from the alley, eyes darkening as he slipped into the crowd. We don't have much time to waste. The man whispered in the short, quick bursts of sound used by someone with experience in stealth. Just one force can't do much against us, but at the same time it's one whole force. And from what the waitress in the bar said, we can't afford to make too many mistakes if we decide to deal with them. Thatch's lips thinned out even more, but he merely nodded, eyes drooping in surrender as he wove his way towards Vista's retreating form. Oh, wait, he can't see me. Thatch remembered, before muttering a soft, "all right," of reply. Behind him, he could barely hear Kingdu's steps, but his breath, however light, shoved its way down his back, a strange yet comfortable reminder that his family was here. That's right. Thatch thought, swallowing slightly as his hands fisted. I have my family. I'm not alone anymore. I'll never be alone again. 00000000000 for a moment, after the pause, Whitebeard waited, before murmuring, you made a wise decision. We'll leave as soon as possible, using an eternal pose if it's absolutely necessary. Hands fisted, mouth set in a determined frown, Sabou murmured. I don't like this. Not one bit. It feels so cowardly. It's like we're running away. From where he was sitting on the stairs, his back against the railing, it was hard to see Ace's features, but it was easy to tell that he, too, was frowning. I get that we need to be careful, he told them, his fingers sliding nervously around the brim of his hat. But I don't like this either. Like Sabou said, I feel like we're running away. Luffy's ever-wide smile was wavering slightly at the topic of conversation. For once, he was silent as he stared at Thatch with unreadable eyes, before he bounded over to Kingdu, and asked brightly, wow, you're super cool, eh? His smile finally managing to finalize its grip on his features. Kingdu, who had been tense ever since he had felt the cold presence, finally relaxed and laughed slightly as he ruffled Luffy's hair. And why would you say that, little man? He asked in amusement. Because, Luffy explained, throwing his arms up in exasperation with a small whooshing sound. You could tell when the bad guy was here and you knew when to make a stratomago. Stratfordafall, Sturgeretica. In the end Luffy gave up on the word and scowled. Smart person thinking run away. Except not running away, because a real man knows when a fight's not worth it. For a brief moment, the dark-haired boy's features were replaced with an older dark-haired man's features, still wide and grinning as he spoke almost the exact same words. The color drained from Kingdu's face. Roger. No, he quickly shook his head. Luffy isn't Roger. Luffy's Luffy. But it wasn't as though he was Roger's son, though. They were all too young, much too young to be Roger's children, and certainly not Luffy, who was more than 3 years after Roger's death. Then when his eyes rested on the straw hat laying atop the child's head, he remembered, ah, yes, Shanks. A smile of relief crossed his lips. That's right. Shanks. Not Roger. He sucked in a deep breath. I'm such an idiot. Oh, yes? Pops had an amused twinkle in his eyes as his booming laughter spread across the ship. And where'd you learn that, brat? I'm not a brat. Luffy pouted, before stars twinkled in his eyes and he answered excitedly, Shanks told me. Pops smiled. All right, then. He agreed. Let's set sail. As he spoke, though, the ground beneath them seemed to darken, and Luffy let out a loud yell of fear as the darkness began to travel up his body, seeming to almost swallow his small frame. A small, gasping sound escaped his lips before the darkness seemed to gulp him down, and it receded. For a moment, they all said nothing, but merely gaped at the spot where the child had once been. And then, Pop's hands fisted, and when he looked up his eyes were filled with the cold intensity of fury. What have you done? He hissed as he glared down at the cocky Marine smirking up at him. It's nice to meet you. The Marine purred sweetly, holding up a finger as darkness swirled around it. I hope that you'll be a good match. I've eaten the yummy yummy no mi and my name is Vice Admiral Takashi. His grin turned feral. But I do hope that I'll get promoted once I bring in your head. Be gone, Whitebeard roared, fury rolling off him in waves. Takashi pouted for a moment, before his smile widened. I know. He murmured and the darkness returned, and formed a large oval. Inside, barely seeable, was Luffy, pale and as cold as death. You fiend, Thatch growled angrily, stopped only when the darkness curled around Luffy's neck threateningly. Let's have a match, Whitebeard. Takashi commanded. And the winner will be able to control this boy's fate. As he watched Luffy's features twisting in pain, Thatch could feel nothing but regret. Fury and regret, coiling in his gut like a twisting snake. He wanted nothing more than to scream. To cry, to shout, to just do something. To show his fury. And to show how much it hurt, knowing that he couldn't do anything to stop the expression that was on the kid's face. Pops stood up, his face darkening as his grip tightened around his Basento. Be prepared, he roared. Rage wrapped tightly around his words. The rest of your short life, Pop stepped forwards. You shall regret ever even knowing our name. Takashi said nothing, merely smirked cockily. Would I? He asked coolly, infuriating Pops even more when he remained cool. Ignorance was bliss. This man must have been ignorant of Pop's true strength, Thatch thought, fists tightening. If he had known, he wouldn't dare to enrage Pops like this. Pop's voice softened dangerously, quiet and calm. So calm that even Thatch felt chills travel down his spine. Usually, at this point, I would offer you your last chance to repent, but you don't deserve even that. Takashi said nothing in reply to that, didn't shake in fear, but merely laughed loudly, and Luffy turned even paler than he had been before and looked as though he wanted to scream but didn't have enough energy to through the pain that he was feeling. You'll pay for that. Thatch raised a fisted hand to his face, surprised when he found that he was shaking. Did he care for the kids that much? He barely knew them, really. They, while cheerful and opening up now, were still secretive, and sometimes the tight rein the boys kept on their secrets shocked Thatch. We know so much, Luffy's birthday. His powers. They were secret, when they had no right to be. No, they had every right. But it's not that dangerous to let us know. His eyes widened as he realized that Luffy was in there, but Ace and Sabou weren't. He whipped around, to see Ace shaking violently. Eyes shadowed as he hung his head. Fists clenched tightly as Sabou sat on him, seeming to hold him back from lunging at Takashi. But Sabou, too, looked like he was about to snap or break. Whichever would come first to him, Thatch supposed. Sabou stared at Luffy, straight at Luffy, unwilling to look at anything but his little brother. Trust us. Thatch whispered softly as he crouched down. Their heads both instantly snapped to turn at him, expressions torn in pain and fear. So, that's what I must look like, eh? Thatch wondered humorlessly. I know that you must have a hard time opening up to us, but you're beginning to trust us. And I don't want that broken, so, trust us. We'll save Luffy. We'll get rid of that marine freak. Trust us, alright? Sabou slid off Ace in his surprise at Thatch's words, before his eyes lowered. I want to. He replied, voice hoarse and uncertain, as though he didn't know whether he should cry or scream. I really do. But, this is Luffy. His hand flashed out and wrapped itself around Ace's wrist. I can't even trust Ace when it comes to my little brother. Ace can't either, that's why. Sabou stood up and wrapped his arms around Ace's waist. He's trying to run to Luffy right now. Thatch peered at Ace, suddenly seeing what Sabou saw. Ace leaned towards Luffy, his mouth open and whispering Luffy's name over and over fearfully. A wild look of panic stretched across his features, like an animal that was about to be killed, his body shaking violently in the need to reach his brother before it became too late. Suddenly, with a chill, Thatch thought that if Luffy died, Ace would too. And if Ace broke inside and became a lifeless shell, Sabou wouldn't be able to bear with losing both of his brothers. We'll save him. Thatch repeated firmly, standing in front of Ace, whose fierce eyes turned to connect with his. I swear my life on it. If he dies, do whatever you want to me. I don't care. We'll save him. Ace's features broke into hesitant relief. Please, he whispered so softly that he might have mouthed it, and then sank to the floor before he said, Sabou, you can let go of me now. Sabou gave Ace a hesitant look, before releasing him. We'll be fine. Sabou told Ace, But he sounded as though he were trying to remind himself that, and they both sat down again, hands clasped together. Just wait a while. That's all we have to do. Yeah. Thatch agreed, bitter that he was so useless in this situation. He sat down next to them and clasped his hands together, bowing his head, praying that Pops would get this over with quickly. Just wait. 000000000 Garp had been searching for weeks. Perhaps even months. It felt like a lifetime, but not one birthday had passed, or at least he was pretty sure it hadn't. He had searched every island in the east, north and south blue. He had sent scouts to the west blue and had some stronger men comb the new world. Even, he was desperate. His grandchildren had gone missing. When he arrived, and Dayton had stuttered out that she didn't know, that she, too, was worried and about to call him. He had wanted to scream at her, to call her an incompetent slug, that she was useless, and he wanted to destroy everything that stood in his path. But her red-rimmed eyes and the exhausted way that she carried herself proved that she had searched the entire island and had been crying when she found nothing. Makino had raced to him. The Whitebeard pirates. She told him. Sabo raced over and told me that they were leaving with them, that it was one of Luffy's whims. They'll be back, she had said. I'm sure, but she had looked uncertain, and bit her nails worriedly, even drinking the stock she was supposed to serve to any customers. So Garp had searched for their Jolly Roger, informing Sengoku that he couldn't take any missions. His position in the Marines was nothing compared to how he felt about his grandchildren. And today, he had struck gold. Waving proudly in the strong wind that the Grand Line tended to have, the Whitebeard pirates' flag. Garp screamed an order, his burden lifted as his ship turned to their ship. But the sight he saw was all wrong. A Marine, a Vice Admiral, who had the same position as him, holding his grandson hostage. The expression of pain on Luffy's face, and the firm will of the pirates that they would protect him. Some part of Garp's mind was in denial. This couldn't be possible. Why would pirates, dirty s of the sea, have honor? Why would they protect something that he, too, would protect? This was a dream, he was just too worried. But his sane part knew better. Knew what kind of a man Whitebeard was, kind, honorable, and, as much as he hated to use the word to describe a dirty pirate, he had his own sense of justice. Although his lower subordinates tried to reassure him he must have been holding the 3 children hostage or something along those lines, and he tired to pretend that it was so, he knew that Whitebeard had treated them kindly. That the 3 had chosen to follow the gentle giant. They had chosen him over Garp. And as much as it felt like a punch to the gut, seeing the undeniable truth before him, he couldn't help but think that it was okay. As long as they got Luffy out of this mess. As long as the other Marine, Vice Admiral Takashi, he believed, an uncouth man who he had once worked with and avoided ever since, was dealt with fairly. Whitebeard could go free. He didn't care. As long as Luffy was safe, Ace, and even Sabo, whose situation he barely knew, whose smile he rarely saw, he would free all the prisoners of Impelled Down if it meant his grandson's safety. Ace's eyes, which used to be completely filled with hatred for the world, had started to be filled with joy. He had smiled more. But now, all Garp could see was fear in his grandson's dark eyes as he tightly clenched his fists, looking furious that he was too weak to do anything. Sabo's hesitation, once too scared to step outside his boundaries, had gone far past them and had been bold, chasing his dream and willing to go against Garp to fulfill them. Now, apt around each other, his lips moved in a silent prayer that his brother would be safe. Luffy was Garp's only blood grandson. But those 2 were his grandsons too. All 3 of them were suffering, and despite the fact that they were foolish and naive, he loved them all the same. He would give up his life for their smiles. So he stepped on the ship, and roared in anger. He had fought alongside a pirate. The living symbol of what he fought, and, for once in his life, he couldn't care less. 000000000 shock didn't quite cover it when Vice Admiral Garp raced onto their ship and fought alongside Pops, fighting the Marine. Wonder, though there, didn't quite fully cover it either. Not even Aw could describe the indescribable moment. The only thing that could have been more shocking was Sengoku fighting alongside Roger, which he heard had happened once, but had never seen before. To say that Thatch was surprised was just about the greatest understatement of all time. But just as Garp turned to deal with the cronies and Whitebeard defended the back of the Marine, one of his rivals, But at the moment an ally, Takashi, struck. A triumphant smile on his lips as he zoomed in on the kill. Thatch didn't know what he did, he had just reacted. He raced forwards, screaming in fury, and had killed the man. The lifeless body fell to the floor, and he could feel everyone's eyes on him, expressions of awe and amazement on every person's face. The darkness wrapped around Luffy vanished, and the small boy fell to the ground, unconscious. Ace and Sabou raced forwards with the rest of his family and clutched at Luffy desperately like a lifeline. Garp not far behind, desperately shouting Luffy's name over and shouting happily in relief when the nurses declared Luffy to be relatively fine, meaning alive. A shout from a cook in the kitchens came out, and he raced from the kitchens, a dark fruit covered in swirls in his hand. "I found a fruit," the man panted, holding it up in shock. "The apple I was chopping, it turned into a devil fruit." Omake. Meeting Whitebeard, or the troubles of being an older brother. As he casually twirled his staff in the air, Sabou tilted his head slightly to smirk at his two brothers. "So," he began casually, "what disaster are we going to stop Luffy from causing today?" Luffy pouted. "Ah, Sabou, I'm not that bad." At his statement, Ace made a queer sound, looking as though he didn't know whether he should be in sarcastic disbelief or be laughing so hard that his ribcage would snap. He muttered. "Not a disaster. We won't stop Luffy from causing a disaster." At those words, Sabou's eyebrows rose past his hairline and Luffy gave a triumphant exclamation of, "See, Sabou, at least Ace is on my side." The youngest of the three paused, then became suspicious. "Ace, why are you on my side?" he demanded. Ace smirked. "I never said that I was on your side," he replied nonchalantly. "I mean that we'll have to stop you from many disasters." "Why do you have to be like that?" Luffy asked, pouting. Ace shrugged. "It's just the way that I am," he replied. Luffy sighed, then smiled brightly. "I'll try to keep out of trouble," he said cheerily, before sniffing the air. His eyes widened. "Meat!" he exclaimed hungrily, before marching off like a dog on the hunt. "So, are we going to go stop him?" Ace asked curiously after a short pause. Sabou started. "OMIGOSH, we just let him loose, on the ship," he groaned. "It's already too late, I know that. We can't stop it now, Luffy's like a force of nature. We can't stop the tornadoes that are coming, I'm scared." He was interrupted by a roar of laughter. "Gurarararara. Brat, what are you doing here?" a deep voice boomed across the deck. There was a loud snicker of response, before a cheery, familiar voice replied, "I just came here, Giant Osan. By the way, do you poop?" The two older brothers exchanged looks, before both turning beet red in embarrassment. "I think that we found him," Ace whispered with a slight groan of hopelessness. "I think we did," Sabou agreed, equally miserable. They sighed. "We're in trouble, aren't we?" Ace asked, almost wistfully as he began to trudge towards the voices. "Why do you think that?" Sabou asked sarcastically, before going after him. "Yeah, big time." They both let out equal sighs of defeat. Why did I ever agree to be his big brother? His heart pounded. His tongue felt dry. And Thatch could do nothing but stare, amazed at the mere idea of this amazing, one-of-a-kind dark fruit once being an ordinary apple. Was such a miracle truly possible? Morphing such a common, everyday fruit into something like this? As a chef, he was amazed. But now, he felt torn between his awe of the fruit and guilt for the proposition that Pops was offering him. I can't," he replied quickly, his tongue tripping over the words, his mind whirling at the thought. "It belongs to you." Or, he swallowed the lump in his throat, casting a glance at the Marine talking softly with Ace and Sabou while Luffy played nearby. Or Garp-san. "Not me. I didn't do anything, His father shook his head. "You deserve it," he replied gently. "You helped me out, and Garp, though he was helpful, he is still a Marine. It would be foolish to give our enemies the upper hand like this." "But I don't deserve it," Thatch replied, hanging his head. Pops smiled gently and patted his head with a large finger. "Perhaps you believe that," he replied. "But I see it differently. Besides," he laughed loudly, "I've already eaten a devil fruit. Remember? What would I do with another one?" "Oh, right," Thatch flushed, before accepting it and bowing. "Thanks, Pops." A gently smile was his response. "No worries, brat. Pops replied. And if you decide not to eat it, you can give it to one of your brothers or sisters. Though, Pops paused. Please don't give it to Namur. Or let him eat it by accident. He's not just our best swimmer but also uses water in his fighting technique, and if he eats a devil fruit. Pops groaned at the thought. Thatch chuckled and raised a hand to his forehead in a teasing salute. Aye, Captain, he replied cheerfully. Pops smiled gently. Why don't you go show off to everyone else now? He asked, a reply to the sloppy salute. Show the younger ones what a big man you are. Thatch stared for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his features, before a wide smile stretched across his features and he stuck his tongue out, a decision he wouldn't have had the guts to make even last week. I'm not that full of myself. He sniffed, before pausing and declaring, oh, wait, yes I am. With a whoop, he hurtled himself toward Luffy before telling a tall tale of how he had bravely taken on Takeshi and saved Luffy heroically. Ace hit the top of Luffy's head, grumbling that it wasn't true and that Thatch was simply an attention hog, but he, too, was listening to the story with a grudged interest. Sabou merely smiled, turned to Garp, and murmured something in a low, firm voice. Garp frowned, and his features darkened, and he murmured something back, his voice tight and filled with fury. But Sabou merely shook his head and stood up, though he looked regretful about whatever they had just been talking about, and jogged over towards Thatch. Thatch's heart pounded even louder as Garp stood up, fists clenched and head bowed. The Vice Admiral stomped over to Pops, and angrily cried out, My grandsons have chosen you, don't you dare wrong them, or I will come for your head. If you make them sad, or betray them, or make them hate you, you won't live to regret it, I can promise you that. Pops stood up. That will never happen, he replied confidently, his voice equally loud, his eyes firm with resolution. They are now my sons. Ace stiffened ever so slightly at the word, son. Softly, Ace mouthed it, looking both scared and relieved. He accepts us? He muttered to Sabou and Luffy in a voice so soft that Thatch could barely hear him. Whitebeard accepts us, and the old man's okay with it? Sabou smiled sadly. Yeah, he replied, his voice equally soft but filled with regret. Over what? Thatch could only wish he knew. I had a talk with him. Whitebeard-san, Pops, negotiated as well. Luffy looked worried. We'll still see Jii-chan, right? He asked curiously. I don't want to never see Jii-chan again. He'll come visit, right? Like on special days, right? Of course he will, brat. Thatch chuckled, ruffling Luffy's hair. What, did you think that we were going to keep your prisoner or something? Luffy laughed as well, relief practically rolling off him in waves. Well, Jii-chan's a marine, he explained. So I don't want him to come over and you guys go bam, kaboom, with each other, because I like all of you and I don't like it when you fight as enemies. He paused, and smiled brightly. Because I don't want my favorite people to be mad at each other. Thatch ducked his head down as his cheeks began to burn. Why are you saying such embarrassing things? He demanded, unable to stop the warm feeling of joy from spreading around his body. Gee, give us some warning next time. Huh? Luffy cocked his head to the side, eyebrows drawing together in confusion. What? Sabou snickered. Get used to it. The blonde lectured him, looking amused at his discomfort. Luffy's straightforwardness is going to be a daily thing. Thatch smiled broadly in response. I know, he agreed, giddy with excitement. Now you guys are permanently going to stay here. Sabou coughed. Well, until we're 17, at least. Then we'll leave to form our own pirate cruise. Thatch snickered, in a I know something that you don't, you poor soul type of way. Yes, of course you will. He replied in amusement, fighting a losing battle to keep a straight face. Sabou stuck out his tongue, looking slightly miffed. You may think that we're going to change our minds and stay, but we're not. Thatch raised a knowing eyebrow, saying nothing in response, but merely smiling as though saying, oh, you think that you're going to have a choice about this, eh? That's funny. Sabou's cheeks flushed even redder than they already were. Really, he exclaimed, looking almost as irritated as Ace usually was. We'll just visit every once in a while or something with our own cruise. Alright, kiddo. Smiling slightly, Thatch ruffled Sabou's hair. Why not go with your theory for a while? Sabou looked like he was at the end of his rope at that statement, and with a huff, crossed his arms. stalking sulkily over to Ace and muttering something sourly under his breath. Ace, who still had a stunned, frozen look on his features, smiled hesitantly, and replied loudly enough for Thatch to hear, "Who knows, Sabou? You may change your mind. A lot can happen in 6 years, after all," in a loud, cocky imitation of Thatch. Not that it sounded anything like him, of course. The great Thatch Sama sounded way cooler than that. Thatch smiled as he watched his 3 new permanent brothers, and, thinking back to his new treasure, felt giddy joy spread in his body. The day's going well. He decided, deeply satisfied with his results. And, I bet, it's going to get even better. After all, nothing could dampen his spirits. Today, nothing could go wrong. Right? 000000000 as he tiptoed his way through the dark halls of the Mobi. Teach smiled to himself in satisfaction. He opened the door to Thatch's room and put the orange-haired man onto his bed. "Thanks, Teach." Thatch mumbled, slightly drunk, but still in control of his senses to a vague degree. "That was one great party, eh?" "Aye, sir." Teach agreed, pasting a cheerful smile on his lips. "Wasn't today a great day for you? You got a devil fruit, and the kiddies joined us, of course." He added the last part hastily, remembering his momentary act. No longer, he thought to himself, elated at the thought of no longer having to pretend, but the devil fruit. "Yeah." Thatch looked like he was slightly disturbed, but torn between the decision to eat it or to give it to someone else. "I don't know what to do with it. I don't like the idea of having that power." The orange-haired man shivered, hands clasped tightly together, head bowed, lips pressed so tightly together that they turned white. "It scares me, the darkness, I mean. The idea of having that same power that hurt Luffy so much terrifies me, but at the same time, this is a great offer from Popslish." Man fell silent, contemplating, seeming so deep in his thoughts that he almost forgot the presence of the man who would soon become a traitor. "If it were me, I'd seize the chance." Teach offered up, smiling slightly as though he were offering advice, not revealing what he was about to do. "Right now, I'm seizing the chance. No risks taken. Whitebeard will fall soon. The offer of the power of a devil fruit. It seems too brilliant to pass up. I'd give up anything for that power. Well," he chuckled. "Almost anything. Anything except my revenge." Thatch smiled fondly, obviously stupidly believing that Teach was talking about his family, though Teach had no idea why he'd be so idiotic as to leave emotional ties with those fawning, brainless excuses for pirates. "Yeah." Thatch agreed with what he assumed that Teach was saying. "I'd never give up my family." He pointed at the small wooden box sitting innocently on top of his dresser. "Especially not for something as dangerous as a fruit." The orange-haired cook paused. It hurt them. But maybe, he curled up his fingers into a tight fist, and he whispered hesitantly, "Do you think that I could use that power to protect them?" Teach wrapped an arm around Thatch's body in a hug, and his left hand silently drew out the dagger from his belt as his left arm also wrapped around the drunk's body. He slid the dagger into Thatch's back, smiling when Thatch stiffened and gasped in pain. Teach laughed loudly, amused as Thatch tried to bring the dagger out with shaky hands. "You, protect them?" he scoffed, before bringing the dagger out and stabbing Thatch again. "What a joke. You can't even protect yourself, Commander." Laughing loudly, he picked up the box on the dresser. "Thanks for helping me take down your oh-so-precious Pops," he teased Thatch. "No," Thatch whispered. "Stop," but he was much too weak to do anything to stop Teach. 000000000. "I'm too weak." Ace clenched his hands into fists, fury boiling inside of his body. Why am I so weak that I can't even protect a single person?" He curled up into a ball, burying his face in his knees. "What did I do that was so wrong that this happened?" Sitting next to him, Sabou frowned. "It's not your fault," he replied, scolding Ace. "It's nobody except that stupid, dead Vice Admiral's fault. He's gone. It's nobody's fault. You didn't do anything wrong. And we'll get stronger together. It wasn't your fault." His voice softened, and he looked equally resentful of himself, suddenly filled with self-loathing. "It's as much yours as it was mine." "Stop it." Luffy's voice was cracking, dangerously on the edge of tears even though he was the only one of the 3 that shouldn't have been crying. "I don't want to see Ace and Sabou like this. I don't want to see my brothers when they're not happy. I want my brothers to be happy. He took Ace's hand, one of his hands, and gently took Sabou's in his other hand, and his lips stretched out in a wobbly attempt of a cheery grin, a ghost of what he usually did. So smile, all right. Sabou smiled slightly and squeezed Luffy's hand. All right, he agreed, but his voice was trembling slightly, and his grip didn't loosen on the small hand, his mind flashing back to the untouchable darkness, and the reminder of how absolutely useless he was. TCH. Ace scowled and turned away, but Sabou could catch the attempt of a smile trying to paste itself on his lips and the bright reddening of his brother's cheeks when he failed. Like I'm going to smile just because of that. Luffy smiled brightly. I know, he exclaimed excitedly. How about we go to Thatchy and ask him to help us get stronger? He defeated the mean darkness dude, right? So he can help us. Sabou cast a hesitant glance at Ace. I dunno, the blonde murmured softly. I mean, they're partying right now and… Ace stood up suddenly, letting go of Luffy's hand. Let's do it, Ace declared, determined. Sabou blinked in surprise. Are you sure? He asked hesitantly. Ace gave him a cocky, arrogant smirk that did little to hide the hesitance in his eyes. When am I not? Ace asked boldly. Right now. Sabou thought, then smiled. But I'm glad for it. Ace is starting to open up, but… Sabou froze. Did he want to open up to the crew? He supposed he wanted to, but… Ace wouldn't get hurt. He couldn't. The crew would be alright with his heritage when they trusted them with that information. It was impossible, Sabou mentally despaired. I mean, it's not like they're Luffy. There's no way that every single one of them would accept it, it's too much to hope for. Hoping for a miracle was futile, he knew as he turned the doorknob to Thatch's cabin, not bothering to knock since he knew that Thatch would either be not there or too drunk to care and remember in the morning. And then, he instantly sank to the floor, vomit rising in his throat and fear swirling inside of him at the sight his eyes found. Thatch's eyes widened as he caught sight of the three boys. No, the once confident man whispered as he staggered weakly towards Teach. What was happening? Not you, please, run. His gasped pleas were ignored as Sabou kneeled, stunned. Ace's features were twisted in fury. What happened? He demanded. Teach smirked, tossing a small wooden chest in his hand from hand to hand. I happened. He replied arrogantly, and laughed. Now try not to scream, kiddies. It would be irritating if I had to fight before I fully got my powers, and I haven't eaten this fruit yet. Be nice and quiet, okay? A strangled sob came from Luffy. You did this to Thatchy? He asked in a small voice. Sabou and Ace turned to their little brother, features both filled with horror when they realized that their brother was there. He was seeing this. He saw Thatch, bleeding and betrayed. Luffy, Ace's voice was the barest hint of a whisper. And what if I did this to your precious Thatchy? Teach asked mockingly. Don't hurt my friends, Luffy whispered, starting to cry. Don't hurt them. And his conqueror's haki exploded, he could feel it. They all could. A tense, powerful sensation ripping the air, so terrifyingly strong that it whipped around the entire Moby. The fury so great that the weaker crew members fainted and the moderate fighters felt weak. The source of the powerful, incredibly terrifying power was a small, scared child, who was crying and doing something he didn't even know how to control in order to protect his brother. They all ran towards the source, before catching sight of the situation. Ace's wide eyes, filled with something like recognition of the haki? Sabou, amazed, but still hugging his brother in an attempt to calm him down. Thatch, who looked weak, but it seemed more due to the stab wounds than the haki, which had avoided him somehow. Perhaps because he was the one it was protecting. Teach, though looking considerably weakened, lunging towards Luffy, an expression of murderous fury darkening his features, a wooden box in one hand and a dagger in the other. Despite Pop's denial, Marco could instantly form the situation in his head, and he knew that the one he had once thought of as a precious brother was nothing more than a dirty traitor. Before anybody else could, Marco moved, only half realizing what he was doing and only fully realizing what he had done when Teach went hurtling through the air, gasping on shock as he stared at Marco. For a moment his eyes filled with shock, before burning Marco with intense hatred. Stop! Pops commanded. His voice sounded slightly wobbly and confused, but underneath it all Marco could hear the crack in it and how it was all Pops could do not to break down. You're attacking without thinking. Attacking one of your brothers is wrong, Marco. The way he said the words was numb and stiff, as though he didn't really know what was happening and was scared of the possibilities. "He's not my brother," Marco hissed. "He's a dirty traitor." He could see the desperation in his father's eyes. The silent plea for him to smile lightly and say, "Just kidding. This was all just an act to amuse you. Ha ha." But they all knew that that would never happen. They had just witnessed someone Pops had accepted harm his family, something that would never be forgiven. Luffy's soft cries grew even quieter until they faded away. The small boy wiped at his cheeks before running over to Thatch, Haruta and Arya not too far behind him. "I'm sorry," Luffy whispered over and over like a broken record, hugging his knees to his chest and burying his face in his arms. "I'm sorry that you got hurt, Thatchy." Ace and Sabou ran up to Thatch as well, surveying the stab wounds with expressions of stunned fear. "I thought this place was safe," Sabou whispered hollowly. "I thought you were family." Thatch, too, looked stunned, and his shoulders were shaking even as Arya pulled him up and began to lead him to the infirmary. "I did, too," Thatch whispered, eyes glazed over as he stiffly followed Arya. "I thought I was safe." His voice, usually so loud and confident, was now filled with childish confusion and on the verge of breaking. "You are," Haruta assured firmly, but she, too, looked shaken up that something like this had happened, and she may not have noticed it had it not been for Luffy being in the right place at the right time, and having that ability, too. "We're all safe. Teach was an exception, he was different from us." "How do you know that?" Ace demanded. "How do you know that not everyone's a traitor? Maybe you're all just pretending. Maybe your family doesn't really care about you. How can you still trust them?" He looked scared, and he looked like a kid. Haruta stared, as though remembering that Ace wasn't an adult. That he, despite his ability to cope on his own, still needed someone to help him every once in a while. "I don't," she finally answered, sadly. "But if Sabou betrayed you, wouldn't you still trust Luffy?" At that question, all of Ace's accusations seemed to die on his lips. Haruta gave him a small, bleak smile, too weary to feel victory at succeeding in making Ace speechless. "I thought we were safe here." Sabou's words echoed in her mind. "Of course we're safe," she thought, determined that it was true, right? 000000000 standing in front of Whitebeard, Ace cleared his throat in an attempt to find his voice. "We have something important to tell you, Osan," he said meekly, a failed attempt to speak with confidence. Whitebeard laughed and leaned forwards. "So, what do you need to tell me?" he asked. Ace's tongue felt dry, and it was suddenly hard to speak. Stupid Luffy, how did he get into this mess again?" Flashback, we're telling him. Standing firmly in front of the door, Luffy's features were set in determination. "I don't care if you don't want me to. I'm telling our family every single one of our secrets." Sabou's head was buried in his knees, and the meek mumble that escaped the mop of blonde and blue could have been a yes, a no, or anything else. "No, you're not." He raised his head enough for his words to be heard clearly, and then folded back in on himself. "I don't care how you try to stop me," Luffy replied firmly, in his desperate attempt to make his brother stop sulking over who knew what and to try to do something. Anything. He didn't even care if had to almost die. This was getting ridiculous. "I'm going." He turned and began to turn the doorknob when a hand settled on his. "Stop, Luffy," Ace commanded angrily. "You don't have any right to tell our secrets." Luffy stuck his tongue out. "Too bad, because I'm going to," he replied, before throwing the door open and running off. "Stupid Ace, stupid Sabou. I'm going to spill all of your secrets." "Luffy, stop," Ace rushed to Sabou. "This is a good time to stop moping," he desperately tugged on the blonde's arm. "Come on, Sabou. Where did my brother go?" Sabou stood up. "I'm right here," he whispered. Ace gave Sabou a dark look. "Are you really here?" he demanded. "Because I can't stop Luffy by myself, and I need you right now." "I'm right here," Sabou repeated, his voice much stronger than it had been before, and he tugged on Ace's arm. "Fine, let's go." End of flashback. Yet somehow, they had ended up here, all ready to confess their secrets to Whitebeard, who was casting the three in expectant gaze. The first word was forced out, and though Ace moved his mouth, he couldn't find himself speaking. After a long moment of silence, Whitebeard began to prod. "You?" he asked. "I'm a noble." Sabou stepped forwards, his eyes cold in determination. Or at least, I'm the son of nobles. But I hate them. I'm nothing like them. Your parents don't determine your worth. You determine that by yourself, and your own actions. He trembled slightly, and his eyes flickered to Ace. And if you think differently, good riddance to bad company. Whitebeard stared at the three for a moment, seeming to contemplate something, before bursting into laughter as the children stared at him, wide-eyed in confusion. Well said. He agreed with a fond smirk. We're all children of the sea. I'm the son of Gold D. Roger, Ace burst out, his eyes wide as he whipped his head up, staring at Whitebeard with eyes wider than saucers, pleading for him to accept it. Though Ace seemed to be deceiving himself into believing that acceptance for something he couldn't control was impossible. Are you okay with that? Whitebeard smiled as gently as he could. Why wouldn't I be? He asked in reply, his voice as warm as the sun. Ace's shoulders slumped, and he seemed to be in too much shock to speak. Luffy smiled at him. I knew you'd accept my brothers, Giant Osan, he declared faithfully, before smiling at Ace. See, we can stay. Why yeah. Ace's lips were quirked into a half-smile of relief. We can. He sounded so amazed. We'll tell the rest of the crew as soon as you're all right with it. Whitebeard informed them. It may take a while, but I'm sure you'll warm up. You can tell one or two that you're all right with, for example, Marco, Thatch, Izu or Jozu. You seem pretty comfortable with the M-Nows. Sabou informed him. Whitebeard smiled. I see, he replied. So that was why she had been acting so jittery after Ace, Sabou and Luffy had first arrived at the ship. No wonder. It may be quite a bit for my children to take in. But I'm sure that they'll accept it. After all, what type of father doesn't have faith in his children? 00000000000 a few months later. Regretting the fact that you told us? Whipping his head around to peer at Marco, dark eyes brimming with exhaustion, Ace laughed slightly. Surprisingly, no, he replied, a slight smile of relief on his lips. I feel like a huge weight's been taken off of me. It's amazing how you were all okay with it. Marco smiled in response. It would take quite a bit to phase us, if it's even possible to do so. We all come from different backgrounds. His finger twitched and a small blue flame flickered to life on his finger, illuminating the two in the poorly lit night. We're all special in our own way. Ace nodded for a moment, seeming to digest Marco's words. When I told them who my father was, they all laughed. Like they were saying, you were worrying over something as small and insignificant as that. And, it gave me this strange feeling. Marco blinked. What strange feeling? He asked curiously. Wait, you're not sick, are you? Ace laughed lightly. No, I don't think so, he replied, amused. But, it was like my chest felt warm. Like it was hurting before, yet somehow I hadn't even noticed it my entire life, and suddenly it was healed. It felt good. He frowned slightly. It feels like when Luffy smiles, or when Sabou laughs. Ah. Marco smiled softly. In that case, I understand what you're feeling. I think that we've all felt it at some time. Do you think that Pops will take us as his sons? As Marco whipped his head to give all his attention to Ace, the freckled boy quickly ducked his head, red-faced. I mean, Ace couldn't finish his sentence, his cheeks burning deep crimson. What are you talking about? Marco asked, laughing loudly. You're already his sons. Ace's wide-eyed look of shock was priceless. Marco smiled. What? He asked. Did you think that you weren't our brother? We're family. I smiled nervously. Ah, was all she could say in response, instantly feeling tongue-tied, and suddenly feeling understanding as to why Dragon-san had neglected his son. Being abandoned by your father was much better than being left at the hands of Eva-chan as an infant. Koala shivered at the thought. Many men still were traumatized by Eva-chan's attempts at turning them over to being Okama, a nightmare that had caused many to consider quitting the Revolutionary Army. Although, of course, Eva-chan meant well, Koala suspected that Dragon-san preferred a normal son to an Okama son, though Okamas were wonderful people as well. Koala-chan. She quickly whipped around, and bowed apologetically when she ended up knocking heads with Toru, the man on the crew who was closest in age to her at 22. Which wasn't saying much, since she was still 12, Toru laughed, before a quick apology escaped his lips as well. No worries, it was my fault for sneaking up on you. He snickered slightly at the bright red invading her face before smiling lightly and pointing at the water. No, wait, Koala's heart pounded in excitement, and she barely had time to wonder, is that, maybe, and she practically flew over to the crow's nest, her feet barely touching the wood before she scrambled awkwardly up the nets to reach the very top. Amano-san, she exclaimed a good couple of seconds before her head popped up as well, before her body followed, her arms clumsily helping her inch forwards. Is that them? Amano chuckled slightly, her lips falling into an easygoing smirk before she teasingly asked, "What do you think, dear Koala?" Thrumming with excitement, Koala raced onto the wooden railing holding up their sails before leaping onto the sails and smoothly sliding down, landing perfectly before unceremoniously landing on her butt. "Ow," she muttered, rubbing her backside with slight whimpers. "Goes to show you should wait until you're as awesome as me to do that next time." Toru snickered slightly before helping her up, his lips turned up in amusement. "I remember how long it took to coach you to get the guts to do that. You were all, but what if I inconvenience everyone? It was hilarious." Koala processed her words, and grumbled in reply after a moment of thought, because she was being trained in being snarky. Apparently she acted more like a 90-year-old than a 12-year-old, something she thought strange because why would they want her to talk back? "Oh, shut up." She paused, and thought it over, then smiled sweetly. "Oh, do you want to be inconvenienced? We have a masochist here in our midst?" "Oh hush, you little brat." Toru swatted at her head lightly, which she easily dodged, and they laughed. "Well, we're here." Eyes bright, Koala eyed the massive ship before them hungrily, wondering what brilliant curiosities it would have in store for her to discover. "May we board ship, now?" Toru ruffled her hair. "Eager, eh?" he asked, a warm smile softening his features. "Well, I don't blame you. The Mobi's quite a thing to be on, or so I've heard from the few men who've been on there. All old guys, veterans." Toru winked at Koala. "I think we'd be the first on the Mobi from the Revolutionary Army who don't have a head full of white hair." Koala smiled back in anticipation. "We're here for someone's birthday, right? Is it someone important?" Toru looked curious as well. "I'm not sure. But Old Man Whitebeard sent Dragon-sama a personal invitation. Said something about Dragon's son. Our boss was quite eager, I'm sure, even if he doesn't seem to be." Toru smirked as a new thought approached him. "I bet he's freaking out over how to seem cool." Koala giggled at the thought, before a bright voice cried out, "All aboard. Hey, Gigi, did I say that right?" There was a deep chuckle, before an equally deep voice replied, "Sure did, brat." Koala didn't bother to wait for the others. As soon as Dragon walked onto the other ship on a rope ladder, she leapt up as high as she could go, and, as she caught sight of a gaping little boy with a straw hat perched atop his head, she decided to show off a little as she flipped and landed perfectly on her feet. On their own ship, the Freedom Chaser, Toru scowled and stuck out his tongue when he noticed her looking. "Show off," he grumbled, before he ran forwards, and following Koala's lead, leapt up high. Just despite her, he twisted slightly, did a backflip mid-air, and then landed on his hands before springing onto his feet. Dragon-san and an old giant who Koala assumed was Whitebeard both shared a knowing, exasperated look before chuckling, and Whitebeard murmured, "Children." As though that explained everything. Dragon looked like he understood, though, and said, "It's not my son's birthday." "No," Whitebeard agreed. "It's my son's." Dragon's eyes darkened slightly at those words, but he dipped his head into a regretful nod. "That was so cool," the small boy with the straw hat dashed up to them, eyes bright in excitement as he cried out, "Can you teach me how to do that?" Toru smiled slightly, before replying, "It's a little dangerous, little boy. Maybe when you're older." "On." He pouted slightly, "No fair." He paused, before puppy dog eyes replaced his wide expanses of brown, and he pleaded, "Just a little trick?" Koala turned bright red. "Well, sure, why not? She's not teaching anybody anything." A sharp, cold voice cut smoothly into their conversation as a dark-haired boy with freckles picked the straw-hatted boy up by the back of his shirt. "Did you forget about not being able to swim, Luffy?" "Ah, but Ace," Luffy whined, "it's just a little trick." Ace's withering glare seemed to put a sudden halt to their plans of having any lessons that, totally, didn't appear in her head at all. Koala gulped as he shot her a no-nonsense look. Yep, he's scary. Then, just as sudden as his appearance, his anger seemed to melt away, and he sighed, running a hand through short black locks. Sorry, he mumbled, bowing slightly and forcing Luffy to do so as well. He's a handful, Lou, apologize for bothering this nice girl. Luffy pouted. Do I have Edda? He asked with a slight groan. Ace raised an eyebrow. Fine, still pouting, Luffy turned to them. Sorry, he mumbled before bowing and giving them a truly apologetic look for about 2 milliseconds, something so quick that Koala had almost missed it before a bright and impossibly wide grin covered half his face. Nay, that was really cool, how did you do that? Lots of practice. Koala replied with a sheepish smile. I still have to work on it, just got lucky this time. If I was unlucky I would have landed on my butt. Luffy giggled as well, before pulling on her arm. Do you want to meet my other big brother? He chirped cheerily. He paused and stared at her in surprise. What's your name? Toru face palmed. Now he remembers, he muttered, but he sounded slightly amused. Ace sighed. Typical. The freckled boy muttered, shaking his head slightly, just typical. Koala giggled. My name's Koala, and this is Toru. She paused. I don't have a last name, and I don't know Toru-chan's. You'll pay for that. Toru muttered out of the corner of his mouth. I'm sure you will. Koala replied sarcastically. You sound quite pleased that I'm confident enough to snipe at you now. Toru scowled at her, realizing that it was true, however regretful. Oh, the boy almost tripped over himself, before declaring, I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and this is my brother. Gold D. Ace. Ace interrupted, his dark eyes seeming to accuse them of something that they had yet to think, as though threatening them to not even let the thought cross their minds. And yes, as in Gold D. Rogers' blood-related son. It was almost like a grudge challenge. Koala felt a little uneasy, but smiled brightly. Cool, she replied. Though I don't think it matters. Peering slightly at Luffy, she couldn't help the sheepish smile that found its way to her features. So that's Dragon Samabe surprised if he didn't even know he had a dad. Ace's features relaxed, and he seemed to instantly brighten. Want to meet Sabou? He asked, pointing at a blob of blue off in the distance. It's his birthday that we're celebrating today. Koala brightened as well. For sure, she exclaimed. Let's go, she turned, and smirked. Well, come on. Luffy smiled even more widely, if possibly. Race you there, he cried childishly before sprinting towards his brother. For a moment Koala gaped at him and the dust that he had kicked up, before scowling. Oh no you didn't, she exclaimed before speeding off after him. Left behind in the dust, Ace and Toru's sweat dropped. So, Ace. Toru coughed uncomfortably. Should we go after them? Ace squinted slightly at them, before sighing. All we do is get tired, he replied. May as well take our time. Toru smiled slightly. I like the way you think, he commented. Ace grinned in reply, and gave an exaggerated bow. I try, he replied, looking relieved that Toru wasn't commenting on his introduction or blood relation. So, you're part of the Revolutionary Army. What do you do? Toru could feel a full-blown smile bursting on his face, threatening to break his face. Well, our main goal is freedom, so basically. 00000000 as Sabou perched on the ship's railing. He smiled at Koala, relieved to find a kindred soul in the madness that had become his everyday life. So, Eva-chan's trying to convert you to dresses, eh? Koala sighed. It would be okay if it was just dresses, she stressed. But they're these huge, bright pink dresses that hurt my eyes. I mean, I love Eva-chan and all but, she shuddered. I'm still recovering from the trauma of just seeing those huge hunks of mutated cloth. Sabou snickered. Must be hard to fight in those. Koala glared at him. Nice to know someone finds this amusing, she said darkly, before sighing, and you don't even know half of it. As she spoke, an odd expression suddenly crossed her face, something that made Sabou feel like Koala was sad for some reason. Oh, Sabou raised an eyebrow, and laughed slightly in an attempt to make her feel better. Well, I don't plan on being told the other half, I'm already convinced. Where's Eva-chan? I need to get you into that dress. He snickered before racing off as she spluttered before giving chase, laughing slightly as well, the odd look gone. Luffy, too, was racing with them, though he didn't seem to have a reason. Ace had comfortably settled with Dragon-sama, Whitebeard-san and a blonde who had called himself Marco, chatting about something with a slight frown on his features. As she ran, she watched as his features darkened slightly, holding tightly reined fury, before it dissolved at Whitebeard's slightly frown, and he nodded as Whitebeard said something in a gently reprimand. Ace's reply seemed cold and bitter, but after Dragon-sama said something, he seemed to relax before muttering something that caused them all to laugh. Present time, a loud voice declared, and Koala paused to stare at the orange-haired man who called himself Thatch, but acted completely like a child. Honestly, he and Luffy were peas in a pod. Present time, a red blur, shortly followed by a blue flash nearly knocked her over. Giggling slightly at the madness that seemed almost impossibly to contain on this ship, Koala followed the two at a much slower pace, and when she got there, Sabou was already tearing open his first present. The blonde paused when he noted the fragile sign, and cautiously lifted the thing inside, staring in amazement at the snow globe. No, the log pose inside. It was a small, precious thing that was on a dark blue band, the color something that couldn't quite be described as navy because of the freedom it held, as though constantly shifting its shade. The log pose was barely visible due to the falling slips of white swirling inside. The log pose was positioned on a miniature replica of an almost perfectly carved mobi, and she could catch sight of the three brothers as well as Whitebeard and some others. It was breathtaking with its intricate little patterns, and the figures inside that were so well done Koala imagined they might start moving any second. "It's beautiful," Sabou gasped, just as enchanted as she was as he ran a cautious finger over the glass, and exclaiming, "Are you sure I can have this?" "No," a man with multiple braids and golden hoop earrings replied sarcastically, a small chuckle escaping his lips. "Of course, you little dolt. Who else's birthday is it?" Sabou smiled sheepishly, before sighing. "I think that I'm in heaven." He sighed happily as he stared at it. "Ah, don't tell me that you're going to leave our presents in those stuffy boxes forever," Thatch whined. Sabou's features melted into a bright smile. "No, of course not," he replied, grinning, and turned back to open the presents. His present from the revolutionaries was a book on navigation. From Izo and Haruta, some clothing. Unknown to Sabou, Haruta had spent hours convincing Izo to get the blonde male clothing. As Thatch and the rest of his division brought out the cake and banquet, and as laughter filled the air, Sabou couldn't help the smile that split his face as well. "A smile looks nice on you." Sabou turned to blink curiously at Koala. Koala turned to him and smiled sheepishly. "You may not remember me, but after you were injured and Dragon-sama saved you from being killed by that noble, I helped to wrap up your bandages and tend your wounds." "Oh," Sabou blinked in surprise, turning slightly pink. "Thanks," he bowed in thanks. Koala giggled. "No need to thank me," she responded brightly. "I'm just glad you're okay." "Those nobles," Koala scowled, her face darkening as all signs of light-heartedness disappeared. "They think they can do whatever they want because of how they were born. I can't forgive that. Being a little selfish, I can understand. But thinking that you can own humans, that lives are yours to control." The wood she was gripping snapped in two, and her eyes widened as she realized what she had done. Sorry," she mumbled, quickly stooping down to pick up the pieces. Sabou knelt down next to her. "So you hate nobles?" he asked, feeling something lodge itself into his throat. "Yeah." Koala nodded, her eyes still dark, but her lips beginning to curve into a smile as her features began to lighten again. "I can't forgive them for what they've done to people, to society. That's why I'm doing my best to do what I can to help Dragon-sama." Sabou swallowed. "Every single noble? All nobles?" he asked as he brushed some splinters into the sea. Koala stared at him in confusion. "Why are you pressing the subject so much?" she asked. "Don't you feel the same way? Don't you hate nobles too?" "Just for being born that way," Sabou persisted. What if someone was born a noble and then was raised somewhere else? Let's say they were taken and raised with normal people, never thinking or knowing they were a noble. Or they didn't like how the other nobles were. Would you still hate them?" Koala frowned. "Why are you asking so much about this?" she demanded, her voice icy cold. Sabou's eyes flickered down. "Because I'm a noble," he replied. For a long time, they merely stared at each other. Sabou could feel his heart pounding, And finally, after a long moment of silence, he couldn't stand her intense gaze and looked away. "I'm sorry." He finally choked out. "It was stupid of me too. He stood up, throwing out the remaining splinters from the broken wood. "I'm sorry," he repeated brokenly, feeling numb and oddly disappointed. "You have no reason to be disappointed," he reminded himself. "She has every right to hate you. You're a noble." But he had just forgotten this feeling. This fear, he had forgotten that people hated nobles, forgotten that not everyone was Oyaji. That koala probably had a strong reason for hating nobles. Sabou had been spoiled by his family by bond, not by cursed blood. He had met people who accepted him, but they were the exceptions. There was no reason for him to expect any more of these blessings that he had long since taken for granted. He couldn't stand it anymore, and staring at her wide blue eyes, he just backed away. Blue. Some part of his brain registered. The color of the ocean. That color means freedom. But staring into her eyes, he felt like he was chained to the spot, unable to move or escape the guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered before running off. Koala sat there, numb in shock, staring into space. "He's a noble," she repeated to herself, before staring in shock where he had just been. "Ah, no, wait, Sabou-san." She started after him, only to trip, and on the ground, she stayed, filled with self-loathing. "I don't hate Sabou," she thought, closing her eyes. "He's not one of those corrupted nobles. If all nobles were like him, the Revolutionary Army wouldn't need to exist. Why would I hate Sabou? Sabou's kind, he's quiet, thoughtful, but he teases me and treats me like everybody else. He gets embarrassed when he's the center of attention, and when everyone else is happy he's happy too. He must hate me, because I said that I hated nobles." Sitting up, Koala brushed away a strand of hair from her eyes and pressed her forehead down onto her knees. "I don't hate Sabou-san," she repeated, and then frowned. Something felt off about those words. Wrong. "Sabou-san," she repeated, frowning thoughtfully. Why did those words sound so wrong? She blinked, then said out loud, decisively, "Sabou-kun." Because Sabou had assured her that they were equals. That they were friends, that he wasn't any higher than her. He had laughed when she first addressed him like that. "Feels like I'm an old man," he had joked, smiling teasingly. "Did I suddenly turn wrinkled, or is my hair white?" He had laughed. "I want a mirror." Koala had stuttered out an apology, then sighed and obliged when he demanded that she call him Kun instead. But it was too late. Her silence had seemed to confirm Sabou's answer. He had left. He probably hated her, a judgmental, shallow girl who seemed to base her preference on blood family, not family by bonds. "Please don't leave," pressing her knees even closer to her chest, Koala started to softly cry. "Please don't leave me alone," he was already gone. 000000000 heart aching. Sabou picked half-heartedly at the loose string at the edge of his bed, his traitorous mind constantly refusing to move from the subject of Koala. Her expression of horrified betrayal seemed to be intensified in his mind, and the silence that condemned him. "Do you want to tell me, Ace?" Peering up, Sabou wilted, and shrugged before quickly looking away. He didn't have to look to know that Ace's features were twisting in pain at the fact that he couldn't help with Sabou's predicament, and the freckled boy sat down next to Sabou. "I'm right here," Ace reminded Sabou. Sabou could practically feel his voice cracking, and tried to force it to stay even. "I know," he replied, pressing his head onto Ace's shoulder. He could feel Ace stiffen in surprise, before awkwardly setting a hand onto Sabou's head. "Tell me what's wrong," Ace begged uncomfortably. I don't like seeing you like this. You're supposed to be the one calling me an idiot for moping and being depressed, and today's your special day. It's your birthday. Sabou, please smile." For a split second, Sabou almost considered smiling that false, glass smile that had led his parents astray so long ago. The old him might have done it to Ace, even if they were brothers, hiding his pain for his brother's happiness. The old him would never have been hurt by him. The old him would have prepared for rejection. Would have accepted it. Would have just brushed it off like it didn't matter. Because he didn't matter. His brothers were worth much more than him, a despicable noble. And maybe the old him was better, but the old Sabou was also uncaring, cold, distant, empty. The new sabou smiled real smiles. The new sabou tried to be warm, caring. The new sabou had family that accepted him, people who didn't care, who made him feel like he was worth something. Was it so bad to be hurt, if it meant that it was a reassurance that he still had emotions? Closing his eyes, sabou laughed slightly at himself. He was so desperate for signs that he was human that he felt almost like he was filtering himself. Sorry, Ace. Sabou sighed, closing his eyes. I don't think I can talk just yet. He could feel Ace's disappointment as his brother's shoulder sagged. Alright. Ace replied softly. Just remember that whatever you say, I'm still here for you. We're brothers, right? Sabou smiled lightly at the reminder and sat up, surprising Ace when Sabou took his head off of Ace's shoulder. Yeah, he agreed. We're still brothers no matter what. And then, surprising even himself, Sabou burst into laughter. I forgot, he sighed in contentment. So what if he was spoiled? He had his brothers, and if that wasn't enough, then nothing was. Just as he finally felt content, the door burst open, and his eyes met with Koala's wide blue orbs of panic. Sabou's chest seized up, and he tried to force back the feelings of regret, quickly looking away and trying to ignore Ace's expression of confusion to why he was reacting like that to the revolutionary's presence. Please don't be mad at me. He tried to force away the flinch he had automatically felt when she started to speak, only for the words to register in his mind. He froze and his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Please. Looking desperate, Koala ran over to where he and Ace were sitting. I'm sorry for how I reacted. I'm sorry that I was so judgmental and hurt your feelings without clarifying first. So please don't hate me for being so shallow, Sabou-kun. Please. At his silence, her expression drooped, and she looked away, looking hurt. Can't you even try to look at me? She begged him. Sabou's eyes widened. And no, he replied quickly, surprised at how forced his voice sounded, how loud his words were. They seemed to echo around the room. I'm not mad at you, Koala. You. Sabou paused, and his eyes widened before he stared at her in almost hungry curiosity. You don't hate me? Koala looked regretful, but when she raised her head to look at Sabou, her lips were set in a determined line. No, she replied, vigorously shaking her head. I don't hate Sabou-kun. In fact, I admired you. You were smart, confident. You got along with people. She paused. You had the courage to do everything I couldn't. She looked down, then peeked at him, hesitant. Sabou's features brightened and a wide smile split his features in two. Thanks, Koala-chan, he exclaimed happily, letting out a sigh of relief. Ace smiled slightly and bumped shoulders with Sabou. So this was what you were so worried about? He asked in relieved amusement. Looks like your girlfriend doesn't hate you after all. As the two turned bright red, Ace skipped off, singing teasingly over his shoulder. Sabou growled in murderous rage. I'm going to kill him. No you aren't. Koala replied sweetly, before sending the door a death glare. I'm going to get to him first. The two stared at each other for a moment, cheeks beat red, before laughter. Thanks for not hating me. Sabou smiled at Koala, letting out a breath that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Why would I hate you? Koala asked teasingly. Now, let's go kill your brother. 000000000. A few months later, swearing as he swung his sword at one of the invaders, Yukine turned to Hana. How are they still coming? He demanded. I swear, it's like these guys are invincible. Hana didn't reply for a moment as she fended off the smallest one, and seemingly the weakest, before her eyes darkened. And they're only children too, she agreed, her limbs trembling slightly with fatigue as her breath started coming out as exhausted pants. How is this happening? The one that was near Yukine gave him a chilling smile. We happened to be a little bored. The boy admitted in a sing-song voice. And then we were told that you had hurt one of our brothers and, well. Gasping as his opponent's form flashed only for a knee to connect with his stomach, Yukine stumbled back, pressing his back to a wall as he held his sword out in front of him, eyes flickering around cautiously. We didn't know, Yukine pleaded. Please stop, we didn't have any part in this. It was just some rogue members of our faction, playing around, we didn't mean to, please. No excuses. The blonde replied darkly before Yukine's sword hand screamed in pain. So you can hurt people as long as it means that nobody will retaliate. Is that what you mean? I find S like you unforgivable? No, Yukine coughed slightly. We didn't mean that. But they were dangerous, they were trash-talking each other. And one of our people had a big temper. Please forgive him, stop. His vision danced dangerously, and the blonde seemed to be blurrier than he remembered. You're hurting my family, he choked out desperately. The boy stopped attacking him, and his bright blue eyes widened. Family, the boy echoed wistfully, and gave Yukine a look of forlorn sorrow. Don't move from that spot. Don't touch anyone or anything, and we'll let you go, alright? Haha, Yukine let out a raspy laugh. No can do. You can't expect me to just sit still while you're hurting my family, boy. The blonde sighed. I suppose you're right. He sighed. Well, you hurt my family first, so I suppose that even if you were a nice guy it's not forgivable. The bright blue eyes suddenly seemed to lose their life, and darkened to an almost black shade. Yukine was on his last bit of strength. He lunged forward sloppily, his sword swung without an ounce of the grace that his sensei had pounded into his mind before letting him enter battle. The boy dodged easily, which Yukine found shameful, since the boy was much younger than himself. Beat by a 10-year-old, Yukine laughed at how ridiculous and pathetic he seemed. And I call myself a marine. The dark-haired boy who Hannah was barely fending off grinned and turned to the blonde. I got 6 down, he called out, snickering. Can you guys beat that? The blonde called out, I got 7. After this guy passes out. He paused to jerk a thumb towards Yukine, I'll have 8. The freckled boy with the black eyes brushed strands of dark black hair from his forehead to grin at the two. You two are losers. Sabou, Luffy, I've got 11. Sabou, Yukine thought as his eyelids started to droop. So, that's the name of the boy who defeated me. And everything went black, a little before the invasion. Squinting as his eyes found the white dome, Sabou wondered out loud, Marco, is it just me or is that white building a marine base? Marco peered out as well, before paling slightly. I completely forgot, he exclaimed, and a few words that Sabou would have punched him for using in front of Luffy escaped his mouth. Sorry, guys. We should have restocked at the island before this, but I thought we'd be able to last, but the chances of landing on this island with a marine base, he sighed. Well, at least the highest ranking officer in this base is only a commander. Sabou frowned slightly. Will this cause any trouble? He wondered. Nah. Ace smirked. It'll be fine. You heard Marco. The highest ranking officer there is a commander. Pops is the strongest man in the world, remember? Yeah. Marco nodded. As much as I'm reluctant to give you ideas, you guys could probably raid the base and not even need our help. Not that you should raid it or anything, he added quickly, just saying. Sabou nodded hesitantly and sighed. Hey, Lou, want to get into town? I overheard some guys saying they wanted to go. Luffy, whose attention had been arrested by Vista's magic tricks, quickly turned his head to face them. Can we? He asked excitedly. Marco opened his mouth to say no, then froze as he stared at the puppy dog eyes. Oh no, he closed his eyes, but it was too late. Luffy's pleading eyes had invaded his mind. Go ahead, he muttered. Yes. Luffy cheered, eyes bright as he dashed off, his brothers trailing behind him. You okay with letting them go like that? Marco tilted his head up, blinking at Thatch. You know they'll probably raid the building, Thatch exclaimed, exasperated. Marco's lips formed an O of understanding before he sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. Didn't think about that, he confessed. Thatch's eyes narrowed and he sat down next to Marco. What's up? He asked in concern. You never stop thinking, you're always so cautious. That's why you plan out all of our attacks or defenses. The orange-haired man paused slightly, then pressed a hand against Marco's forehead. You're not sick. No, I'm not, and I doubt I ever will be. Marco batted Thatch's hand away. He closed his eyes. I haven't been feeling quite like myself lately, I suppose. Thatch's lips formed a thin line, his forehead creasing in worry. What's wrong? He pleaded. I don't like seeing you like this. Everyone's finally stopped treating me like the best china. I'm not made of glass. Things are finally starting to go back to normal, so why are you like this now? Marco was silent for a moment, before whispering, the crew looks up to me. Pops, too, of course, but we division commanders have to stay strong for them. He looked away, as though he didn't want to meet Thatch's eyes, too scared to see what Thatch's expression would be. I was the first to join Pops. Ever. He practically raised me. I've always tried to live up to that. Be strong, not to break. So I kept up a smile for everyone, told them it was all okay. But, his voice cracked slightly. It's not okay. My world just feels like it shattered. I feel like I'm stepping on broken glass. I don't know what to do anymore. Thatch frowned. You're fine. He replied, repeating the chant that had come from Marco's lips every day since Teach's betrayal. We all are. It's not going to happen again. Teach was different from us. We always knew that. We just chose to ignore it. But what if we make it again? Marco demanded. What if we make the same mistake? Choose someone to join us who hates us? I made Pops accept Teach. I brought him here. It's my fault, and then he was silent. The quiet, noiseless atmosphere was terrifying to Thatch. Stop worrying, he repeated. It's not your fault. What if it is though? You're just trying to make me feel better. I know I was stupid. I liked Teach a lot. He was on the way to taking over as 2nd Division commander. And he did this to you. The blonde made a vague gesture at Thatch's stomach. What's wrong with me? Nothing, Thatch replied firmly. You believed in family, is that so wrong? No, Marco shook his head and sighed, smiling slightly at Thatch. Thanks. I guess that it isn't so wrong, you're right. Thatch grinned. Of course I am. He replied arrogantly. I'm always right. Now come and get some sweets. I'm experimenting with hiding the taste of spinach in candy. Marco shook his head and laughed at the idea of vegetables in sweets. Coming. He agreed, before casting a slight look at where he had seen Ace, Sabou and Luffy race off. I bet the kids would love it when they're back. Thatch looked at him in surprise, then his expression softened. Yeah, he agreed. I'm sure they would. The two exchanged light smiles, and as the tension in the air began to lift, they went off towards the kitchen. 000000000. I'm fine, choked out words. A small, pained smile as he placed a hand gingerly on the place where the Marine's knife had slashed. Kino gave Sabou a hesitant grin. No worries, little man. Luffy had frozen, face pale. There's a lot of blood. Luffy muttered, voice soft in fear. Sabou, there's a lot of blood. Shaking slightly, Luffy wrapped his arms around Ace's waist. The eldest of the three placed a hand on the youngest's head, eyes dark in fury. How dare they? Was all he said, his voice ice cold as he stared regretfully at Kino's wound. Your back was wounded. Those dishonorable little. Ace swore a couple of times, his fists tightly clenched. Kino pasted a pale ghost of a smile on his lips as he placed a small hand on Ace's leg. I'm fine, he replied, and struggled slightly to get up, only to slide backwards and slide slowly down the wall. Really? Sabou curled up into a ball, his forehead pressed against his knees. A wound to the back is a symbol of dishonorable fighting. He spat out angrily. Those Marines, telling us to have some honor and justice, when they ignore the very things they preach to us. Luffy started crying softly. Ace was frozen as Luffy's arms wrapped even tighter around his stomach, and hesitantly began to rub circles into Luffy's back in an awkward, half-questioning fashion. How do I deal with a crying brother? He silently wondered, sending Sabou a pleading look. But the blonde was too busy trying to explain to Kino that he wasn't alright and that they wanted to avenge him to pay attention. It's okay, Lou. Ace choked out, but his words sounded frail and lifeless even to his own ears. It's all going to be alright. Really? So stop crying, okay? It's fine. He's alright. Kino's not going to die. He's just a little injured. The excuses sounded hollow and pathetic, a far cry from the truth. You liar, Ace. Luffy mumbled tiredly, sounding like he was trying to believe Ace but unable to and angry that he couldn't buy the wishful lie that his older brother had given him. He's not okay. Sabou turned to them, his face like thunder. I managed to contact Rikuya. He's bringing Kino back to the ship, so that Kino can get treated. He informed them, his words short and clipped, eyes narrowing as his hands turned to fists. If it had been a fair fight, those cowardly weaklings would have been easily defeated. What ifs mean nothing, Ace responded, a little dazed when he realized that he, not Sabou, was acting as the voice of reason, for once. We can't change the past. No, Sabou agreed, cracking his knuckles. His lips formed a wicked grin. But we can still beat those cowards up. Ace blinked slightly before grinning. I like the way you think, he replied. And Marco did say that even we could take them by ourselves. We're not really weak, he glanced at Luffy and added teasingly, at least most of us. Hey, I'm really strong. Luffy protested slightly. He wiped the tears from his eyes quickly, before his lips twitched from their frown and quirked up into an impossible grin. Hey, you're not leaving without me, are you? He asked, laughing slightly. Let's go B000. After the raid, what were you thinking? Marco demanded as he wiped at Sabou's cheek with a disinfectant, offering no sympathy when the blonde winced at the pain. Going against an entire marine base like that. Whatever gave you the idea that you could take them, you idiots? You. Ace grumbled sourly in reply as a nurse treated him with a little more gentleness than Marco was giving Sabou. You were the one who told us that we could take them, remember? I said that so that you wouldn't be worried, not so that you'd go and raid them out of your own free will. Marco replied angrily. Why did you do something so risky? Wouldn't you have done the same? Sabou demanded. If they hurt your nakama. Stop treating us like kids. Maybe we're younger than you, but we still have honor. You think that we'll just sit back and wait for someone else to avenge our nakama when we were the ones who failed to protect him? You think that's going to happen? Marco stared at him for a moment in mute amazement, before smiling slightly and whispering slightly, yeah. Sorry. He pressed the cloth more gently against Sabou's cheek, thinking back to when he had first fought. Stop treating me like a doll. I'm not going to break. I'm strong now, maybe it wasn't all that bad. You know what? He asked, smiling slightly. Sabou looked a little curious. What? He asked, then added suspiciously. Wait, this isn't a lecture, is it? Marco laughed lightly. No, don't worry. I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you guys for doing what's right. The three beamed at him, pride swelling up in their chests as they grinned at him. However, their smiles immediately froze and drooped slightly. I do not approve of the consequences. Ace looked slightly hesitant, but they all knew he had to ask. What happened? He asked. Marco sighed before tossing him the newspaper that the news crew had given him. Take a look for yourselves. He grumbled sourly, shaking his head slightly with a frown. Ace blinked slightly, looking perplexed. Sabou, as well, was for once stumped as to why Marco was giving them the newspaper. The eldest of the three unfurled the newspaper, before his eyes widened at the three bounty posters peering up at him. Silver Flash Sabou, 7 million Sabou, shooting the photographer a dark look, his pipe hanging loosely from his hand, top hat slightly crooked and shadowing his eyes, making him look much older than his true age. Straw Hat Luffy, 5 million Luffy, grinning stupidly at the frame. That idiot, his new trademark barely fitting in, Ace and Sabou in the background, standing over some whimpering, pitiful soul. Fire Fist Ace, 10 million Ace, fist pulled back, ready to clock the photographer. Ah, yes, he remembered now. The guy had been fast at running, and he had eventually given up on him. Ace scowled. He should have taken him out. Fire Fist? Marco asked him, sounding unimpressed. Why would they name you that? Sabou snickered. Because this pyromaniac lit fire halfway through and went around punching people. That would explain the burns. Marco shot Ace a withering glance. Didn't you think to put the fire out by not punching people? Ace rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Sabou actually threw some water over my head. I didn't even realize I was burning until my hair started burning. I barely felt it. Marco groaned. Here's Shanks' reaction to Luffy's bounty. He stared, and panicked like crazy. Boss. Ben sighed as Shanks started sobbing about how his little anchor had grown up and started to get drunk. In the middle of the afternoon. Again. You were looking forwards to this, weren't you? You were excited, and couldn't wait for Luffy to join us out at sea. So why are you so? He gestured at the mess that he called his captain. But he's so young, Shanks blubbered. Look at the cute face on the bounty poster. And it says dead or alive. What if he gets hurt? Remember how much he cried when he stabbed himself? How he tried to deny the pain? What if bounty hunters think he's an easy kill? Or what if? Just shut up already, you mother hen. Ben scowled. I don't care about your stupid issues. Luffy is strong, he can handle himself. It is very hard to ignore a one-armed, sobbing, red-haired man. Especially when he's supposed to be one of the strongest men in the world. 00000000000 on the Moby. Marco suppressed a shiver. What is it, Mother Hen? Thatch asked, his voice completely innocent despite the nickname that he had casually used. Nothing. Marco scowled. I just was reminded of that man suddenly. And go die, you stupid cook.